I never decided that I was going to do wholetailing. To this day, I still also don't consider myself a wholesaler, but I guess it falls under the same stream because I don't have a buyer list. I don't pursue it like that. I don't assign my deals. So I consider myself more of a wholetailer, if that's a real thing. So definitely, I guess COVID was definitely negative in a lot of aspects, but it was positive in certain aspects when it comes to real estate investing as well.
Welcome to the Deals Estate Wholesaling podcast, where we discuss finding, financing, and facilitating off-market real estate deals. I'm your host, Deji Odunton, and I'm joined today on the show by Ardeep Puri to discuss and share his experience implementing the wholetailing strategy. Ardeep is a cross-border real estate investor who actively invests in multiple US states as well as the Ontario market. He has completed many BRRRR projects remotely in the US and is currently pursuing wholetailing as his primary strategy here in Canada, in Ontario. Ardeep utilizes various real estate strategies to acquire his deals and understands how to quickly pivot based off different market cycles in the world of real estate investing. In today's episode, Ardeep and I discuss the differences between wholesaling, wholetailing, and flipping. We also discuss why wholetailing is an optimal strategy in this market. And finally, we discuss the challenges and the risks involved in implementing this strategy. So guys, you do not want to miss this episode. Be sure to listen to the very end. Now, before we dive in, I want to say a big thank you to everyone who is tuning in. If you are a fan of this podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button. A 5-star rating and review would also be appreciated. So guys, without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Hi, Ardeep. Welcome to the Deals Estate Wholesaling podcast.
Hi, Deji. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Thank you for coming on, man. This is a very, very interesting episode that I have been looking forward to. I don't think a lot of people have heard about the wholetailing strategy, so it's something that I'm happy to share with them today. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast to share it with everyone.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Cool, man. So how have you been? What's been going on with you?
Recently, actually, surprisingly, a lot of wholetails, a lot of U.S. investments, and it's been busy. I mean, 2023 still has a few weeks left, and we're still pushing forward. I still think it's a great time to buy.
Okay, so the word busy and 2023 isn't what I hear a lot. So I guess we should start off by giving everyone some context about who is speaking, right? Who is telling us that 2023 has been super busy? Who is Ardeep Puri? And, what has your journey been like from when you started real estate to today?
Yeah, of course. I guess born and raised in Montreal, Quebec. I moved to the GTA about maybe 12 years ago now. Growing up, I grew up in a family where my parents were always flipping their primary residence. So in a way, I've had maybe about a dozen addresses right now growing up in Montreal before I moved to the GTA. So flipping has been something I've been exposed to at an early age. At that time, you don't really understand it. You don't understand what's going on here, why your parents are not available to take you places on the weekend or spend time with you. But when I moved to the GTA, I guess going back a little bit, when I finished university, I started getting into flips, in my mid-20s, I would say. We got into flips. I did a few flips in Montreal. So I was acquainted with a lot of the process that go in. I had a good mentor, which was my parents, of course. Moved to the GTA and quickly realized that the cost of living here is a lot more than Montreal. So the 9 to 5 probably wasn't going to cut it for me. So at that time, I realized, what investment vehicle would I take to actually get to where I want to get to, being an ambitious individual? So I looked into real estate. And at that time, in hindsight, of course, I think I should have maybe bought more in the GTA, but I actually decided that I was going to invest south of the border. The
Okay.
reason being, I looked at Windsor, I looked at Sudbury, I looked at some other market outside of the GTA, but mostly in Ontario.
Yep.
And I quickly realized that if I'm investing remotely, what holds me back from investing south of the border is still investing
Yeah.
remotely. So, there's definitely a learning curve. Spoke to a few individuals that were already investing in the US. They kind of helped me get a better understanding of the market, do some market research. And based on that, I dabbled into the US market, I would say about close to 7, 8 years ago now.
Okay.
When I first got into there, I was buying properties in Florida. Perfect BRRRRs. I mean, at that time, single family houses were probably going for about $90,000.
Oof.
Right now, I'm still holding on to them, and they're getting appraised for 400K, which of course is not usual for the U.S. market. On the Canadian
Yep.
market, we see that all the time. But in the
Yeah.
U.S. market, I mean, just to show you how much it's appreciated, it's kind of good if you've been holding on. But I find certain markets it's a little more challenging to enter. And then during COVID, of course, one of the reasons I got into wholetailing was during COVID. I realized that off market is the way to go. Everyone was grabbing all the inventory, prices were through the roof, and the only
Yep.
way to find off market deals was usually through wholesalers or if you were sourcing them yourself. So that got me into wholetailing.
Okay. So there's definitely a lot to unpack there. I feel like maybe I should have had your parents on the podcast instead, since like there's a lot of experience they would share. So maybe let's start from there, right? So
Yes.
you grew up in Montreal. Your parents were experienced flippers in Montreal. Um, was there a reason why you chose the south of the border versus Ontario versus just staying in Montreal where you grew up in and you sort of knew the markets?
Yeah, so Montreal, Quebec, I mean, there was a few reasons I had left. I mean, at that time, the mindset is also, let's work the 9 to 5. Let's try to, save money, buy a property. It doesn't allow you to really scale.
Okay.
So I realized that, if I'm looking for the 9 to 5, I'm better off going to other provinces. I'm also mostly English speaking as well. So the French language
Okay.
was causing a barrier at that time.
Okay.
So I moved to Montreal, moved to Toronto.
Got it.
When
Okay.
when I moved to Toronto, obviously, I mean the prices were still higher than me looking into the states. So
Yeah.
that's another reason that, based on price points, I gravitated towards the states, even based on the currency exchange rate. I mean, even if you factor that in, you're still getting a better bang for your buck in the states. And as we know, I mean, there's a lot of landlord-friendly states compared to the
Yep.
Ontario market, compared to Quebec, compared to BC. So the Canadian market, I just completely overlooked it, and I went straight to the states. I'm like, you know what? If I'm
Okay.
gonna do this, pursue it. In terms of not flipping, of course, I went more in the BRRRR strategy, of course, creating that
Yep.
long-term wealth in terms
Okay.
of holding those properties. And to this day, I still hold a lot of my properties. Flipping, of course, is short-term gain, but of course, is lucrative. So
Yep.
there's two different strategies, and I decided that I was going to pursue the BRRRRs, and that was going to be south of the border.
Okay. Thanks for that. Now, another question that came to mind is, more recently, there's been a lot of inf- well, I wouldn't say influx, but outflux of investors moving from Canada to the US. But it seems like you did that about 7 to 8 years ago. So I wanted to get your thoughts on how that experience has been. I know you mentioned that it's been BRRRRs, but how that experience has been investing in the US versus Canada for the past 7 years, and also to touch on the comment you made around you should maybe have invested in Canada instead of the US. So just wanted to get your thoughts on, you know, did you move in too early, to the US versus Canada, or do you feel like you got in earlier than all the investors who are getting in today?
Yes, no, that's a great question. I mean, in hindsight, of course, it's 2020.
Yep.
Looking back at it, I mean, yes, I would say based on my network, the investors I speak to today, a lot of them are slowly getting into the U.S. investing side. I definitely started a little earlier than a lot of people I do know. Back then, I find depending on the markets you were looking at, the prices were a little more appealing. A lot of people weren't aware of the U.S. market. What I feel has happened is that the prices in Canada across the multiple provinces have just gone up so much that it's a little harder to cash flow, it's a little harder to buy properties. And that's the reason that a lot of investors are now gravitating towards other, I would get other countries, other states.
Yeah.
In my experience, even Florida, to be honest with you, it's appreciated so much that I feel like I'm priced out of the market. So what
Okay.
I'm doing, or what I did during COVID, is expanded into my second market, which was Tennessee.
Okay.
So as you know, the border was closed at that time. So I had no choice but to build a team remotely, do the BRRRR remotely, find financing remotely, obviously, close a property remotely, which I usually do all the time. And then based on that, I entered my second market because as an investor, you need to pivot, right?
Yep. Yep.
And that's what I find a lot of investors on the Canadian side are starting to do. They're starting to realize there's a lot more opportunity on the US side, as opposed to just jumping from one province to another province, not just because of the price point, but also what the US market has to offer. It's 10 times bigger, a lot more opportunity, a lot more supply.
Yeah.
Inventory is another question right now because, I mean, based on what happened during COVID, inventory levels are low everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
Canada, US, every market. So it's harder to find those deals on market, which allow you to actually generate a positive return, I would say. I mean, some
Got it.
investors I know are holding onto properties with a outlook that these interest rates are going to come down and they'll just refinance and at least they got into the deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
My strategy has always been make money on the buy. So
Yeah.
regardless if I'm trying to do a BRRRR, if I'm trying to do a wholetail in Ontario, I'm always looking to make that money on the buy.
Got it. Okay. So that's your primary strategy in the US, doing BRRRRs, holding them. Then you mentioned that here in Canada, your primary strategy is the wholetail. So I wanted to get your thoughts on, why you chose the wholetail strategy in Canada and not necessarily the same strategy that you are doing in the US. What was your thought process around the choice of your strategy here in Canada?
Yeah, no, great question. So I was thinking about this, and a lot of people have asking me what wholetailing is, how I got into it, what it involves. And going back, I never decided that I was gonna do wholetailing. To this day, I still also don't consider myself a wholesaler, but I guess it falls under the same stream because I don't have a buyer list. I don't pursue it like that. I don't assign my deals. So I consider myself more of a wholetailer, if that's a real thing. So definitely, I guess COVID was definitely negative in a lot of aspects, but it was positive in certain aspects when it comes to real estate investing as well. Two that come to mind is definitely, I mean, a lot of prices because these interest rates dropped drastically across Canada and the US. Prices went through the roof. So if you were holding any properties, I mean, you're grateful for that because appreciation passively is something you can definitely utilize.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening during COVID on the Canadian side, specifically in Ontario, I realized that because these interest rates were low and a lot of people had a lot of buying power, they had a lot of means of capital.
Yep.
They were buying these these properties from wholesalers, but it ended up being a bidding war. So all these off-market deals, the only way to get into it was if you were going above asking, regardless if it was on market, regardless if it
Hmm.
was off market.
Yep.
I put in offers for properties that I was intending on flipping during COVID times, and I was outpriced. I was outbid by other investors. I mean, there was properties asking the wholesaler was asking about maybe 500,000. They were selling for 650, which in my opinion was a bidding war, and
Yep.
that's off market. So that made me quickly realize that the only way to source these off market deals is if you're sourcing them yourself. So I had no intention of trying to find my own deals. So I did a lot of research. I looked at what was working. So there's flyers, there's SEO optimization, there's door knocking, there's cold calling, there's different avenues where you can pursue these off market deals. And you hear about it and you're like, well, everyone keeps saying the same thing about, try to just send out flyers, try to, door knock, try word of mouth, talk to contractors. And that's when I realized, you know what, let me just give it a try. So obviously I honed down on the markets I want to look at. I looked at lower price markets. I mean, I primarily focus on the Durham region in all
Yeah.
transparency. I find that's my market. I like the east side better than the west side. And I've had success in that market. And I feel like in that market, it allows you to find these properties that have been, I would say, not complete gut jobs, but they have been a little neglected over the years. They need some cosmetic renovations. They are in
Yep.
livable conditions, and that allows me to negotiate with the seller off market through flyers, SEO optimization. and have that conversation where I can actually go in and acquire these properties at a discount.
Yeah.
So that kind of got me into the wholetailing stream. To be honest with you, my first campaign wasn't really a success, but then you definitely, adapt, you pivot, and you realize what's working. And since then, we've had a few successes.
Okay. So I think let's break this down now. And I don't want to assume that everyone understands what wholetailing is. So, within the context of real estate, you have wholesaling, you have wholetailing, you have flipping. So from your standpoint, how would you explain the differences between the three?
Right. No, great question. So a wholetail is pretty much a hybrid niche strategy, in my opinion. What it is, I mean, wholesaling would be you're still finding the property off market and then you're assigning it to another buyer, likely off market as well. And what you're doing is taking the assignment fee as a wholesaler. So you do not end up closing on that property. When it
Yeah.
comes to wholetailing, what I do is actually I definitely try to source these properties myself, buy them off market at a discount, lock them up. Once I lock them up, I don't necessarily assign these contracts over to anybody else. I actually close on the property and I end up being the end buyer. Once I become the end buyer, I relist this property on the market, which ends up being catered towards retail buyers who will then purchase this property. So essentially, what I'm doing is taking an off market property that's deeply discounted and putting it back on the market. But when I'm putting it back on the market, I still leave enough meat on the bone for the retail buyer. Doesn't matter if it's going to be someone who's going to live in it or another investor, for them to actually make a profit or buy with equity. And that's the biggest difference, I would say, between wholesaling and wholetailing. And the word wholetail, actually, it's a combination of wholesaling and retail. So when you combine the two, whole and retail, you kind of get wholetailing,
Yep.
which is pretty much, saying that you're getting it off market, but then you're putting it on market. And that's the space that I've been having success with and playing in. There is definitely, when it comes to fix and flips, obviously, I mean, you're taking it from off market, you're doing the rehab, you're putting the renovation budget in there, but the timeline is what you got to factor in because, when it comes to a wholetail, for example, I've done one which took me 3 weeks to sell from when I closed on it.
Yep.
So you can do these wholetails within 3 weeks if it's a lucrative deal. Whereas a flip, I mean, I doubt you can do that in 3 weeks. It'll probably take you 3 months. And by then you got to take into consider market conditions. You got to take into consideration your GC, your timelines. So it's a completely different ballgame. Of course, I mean, some of the case studies that I can share with you later on, I mean, there's enough meat on these deals that you can actually find them off market, do the renovations, and then flip them on market.
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot for that breakdown, man. This is something that I usually like diving into because I know that not so many people are aware of how this works, but you've really broken it down very well. Another angle that I like to look at it through would be, return on time, and you sort of touched on that, right? So with wholesaling, when you are engaging with the seller, you're negotiating with the seller, that's your highest return on time because when you get that in on that contract, you could just assign it to an investor. That investor goes on to close on it, but you just make money once that deal closes. So your return on time is the highest, right? And I look at it like a sequence. So if I don't assign that deal and I decide to close on the deal and immediately list it on the market, as you said, that's wholetailing, where the risk that you take with wholesaling, the risk is almost zero because, again, you have it under contract, you assign it to an investor. If that investor doesn't close, you still bear no risk as a wholesaler, right? You just get money for the contract with almost zero risk. Now, when you do a wholetail, that's when risk starts, but the risk is still slightly measured and mitigated, right? Because as you mentioned, you don't have to work with a GC, you don't have to go 3-6 months of renovations. If you're carrying private financing, you're not necessarily exposed that much, to a lot of holding costs. So your risk is very limited to just the few weeks that it takes to close and immediately list on the market. And then with flipping, that has the higher risk where You then take on, 3 months of rentals, 6 months of rentals. You deal with contractors, you deal with timing risk, you deal with market risk, you deal with financing risk. So it's like risk and reward, right? Wholesaling, zero risk. Wholetailing, medium risk, and then flipping obviously has, the highest risk. So it really depends on what your risk strategy is, and how much risk you are looking to take. But yeah, thanks a lot for sharing that context.
Yeah, and those are great points. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like the return on time is something that's really valuable right now, right? I mean, you can spend money and get money back. You can spend time, but you're not getting that time back. And that's absolutely right. So when I look at it from a wholesale perspective, I look at the wholesale part as well. And the wholesale part, I feel like the assignment fee is definitely there, but it's more volume based usually, right? You mean
Yeah,
you got to probably do multiple deals to generate the same income as a wholesale. And I say that because risk and reward, once again, as you mentioned, if you have enough spread on a deal, you can technically, instead of assigning, I'm just throwing numbers out there, taking a
yep,
10 or 20K assignment fee, you can close on that property because there's a significant discount. And now that spread that you were going to give that retail buyer or maybe the end buyer on a wholesale deal, you can actually split that in half technically. You can actually, take on a 40, 50K profit on a wholesale deal and still leave 50K to a retail buyer who's going to buy it. The reason
yep,
the retail buyer is not so concerned about how much you're making is because they're buying it on market. But because on market it's significantly discount, it's such a good deal to them. And I actually have a situation where that did happen, where a corporation actually came and bought a deal off of us because they were going to flip it. So the property itself, we had acquired it off market, significant off market. We put it on the market and we sold it to a numbered corporation. So the
okay,
investor was jumping on this deal because he realized that there's a huge, amazing flip opportunity that's available on market and the spreads made sense. So that's just an example on like, because the spread is so good and you've negotiated it at such a good discount that you can provide these opportunities on market. And your on market database is immense. I mean, you have thousands and thousands of people that are constantly looking at the MLS. Whereas I find if you're a wholesaler, I mean, you got to build that list over time. And for me,
yeah.
that's not something I pursue. I mean, I don't have a database of 4 or 5 thousand people that I can just email blast. I just put it on the market and I just wait and see what happens.
So that's a fantastic angle, to look at it from, because another thing that I've noticed is with hotels, when you get a property off market and you list it on the MLS, there isn't price history, right? And price history is one of the most annoying things that flippers have to deal with. Like once you see that, okay, this house just sold for X amount, then it anchors your price. But with off market deals, if you close on a deal today and you list it on market, the buyers who are negotiating with you have no idea, how much you bought it for, right? Because you bought it off market. It would show on Geo Warehouse maybe if a couple of weeks. Some savvy realtors, would pull like the like title details are the lawyers, but not everyone would check that. So once the price history hasn't fully translated yet, you could definitely negotiate whatever price you want because price history isn't there. So that's also another advantage that I found with hotels, where if you're able to sell it fast enough, the buyer doesn't necessarily know how much you paid for it off market.
Right. And these wholesale deals, I mean, they're still in livable. Most of them are in livable condition. I mean, it's not something that's inhabitable. So for you to list it on market, I mean, some people might just move into it and they might just say, like, listen, I'm going to live in this. I'll renovate it over time. But because I bought it at a significant discount, I'm happy. Or a flipper
Yeah,
might come in there and say, like, you know what, I'm going to buy this right now and just flip it because there's so much equity on the buy.
yeah.
So it's a win-win. Yeah.
And that's another point you make, right? Because the initial example you gave is if you are wholetailing this to another investor. But another upside with wholetailing is, to your point, if the property isn't run down and the property is in a good condition, it's just discounted because the sellers had issues or they just wanted to walk away from the property. You could essentially be buying a turnkey property for like maybe 100K below market value. And then when you
Yeah.
list it on the MLS, you are not just targeting flippers on the MLS now. You are targeting first-time home buyers. You're targeting retail, like proper retail buyers who aren't necessarily looking for a discount. They're just looking for a house to buy. So
Yes.
now you could get someone who is looking to pay you like top dollar for your property just because it's on the MLS. So, I think even the type of property that you get to do a hotel is also important because the right type of property opens up your buyer pool from just investors on the MLS to investors and retail buyers on the MLS.
Yeah. I'm actually glad you mentioned that. Yes, there are specific properties we do target. I mean, we get lots of leads, and when you walk through, you're like, you know what, this is not going to work. The spread's not enough, the layout's not good enough, the neighborhood's not good enough, the comps are not supporting this acquisition. So not just, it's not that you get every single lead and it's going to turn into a wholesale or wholetail deal, you know.
Yep.
So what we end up doing is we definitely look at, okay, what you need multiple exit strategies, even within this strategy. As you mentioned, there's less risk when it comes to wholesaling, right? Because you're not obligated to close on it usually. When it comes to wholetailing, man, I've signed the contract. I'm going firm. There's a closing date. So I have to buy this and then I have to dispo it on market. So in between, let's say the market shifts or, I'm not able to sell it or the closing is too far out. Well, what's my exit? Okay, no one wants it on market. These interest rates right now are scaring everybody. So no one's really buying, as everybody knows. So it's like, what is your exit? Okay, well, are you going to convert it to an in-law suite? Do you need to finish the basement? Do you need to fix and flip it? Because putting it just on the market, I mean, there might not be any interest. So you need multiple exit strategies as backups. But because you bought it at a significant discount, it allows you to, mitigate those risks. Whereas, if I bought something on market at retail price and then my intention was to fix and flip it, I mean, there's no spread for me to do that. I'm going to be under the water if the market turns on me. So that's one of the things when it comes to wholetailing. Yes, risk and reward, as you mentioned prior to this, it's something you really need to factor in. And if you see that the comps, renovated comps, are significantly higher than what you locked this property up for, I mean, that might be your second or third exit. But my primary exit is definitely putting it back on the market and letting it go at a discount. So even when it comes to putting it on market, I don't put it at market price. I discount it maybe by 10, 15% because there's still enough equity for me to make a profit on it and for the retail buyer to see that it's actually a very appealing deal.
Okay. So I wanted to dive in on this because to your point, depending on the type of property it is, you could have multiple exits from a strategy standpoint. So for example, if you buy a property with an unfinished basement, then that's obviously an opportunity to raise the value of the property by finishing the basement. So I wanted to find out, when you're looking for properties that are suitable for hotels, is there any criteria that you use to identify if this property is suitable for a hotel and if this property can carry you in an event where it doesn't sell on the market? Like, how do you think through that? Because from my standpoint, there was a hotel that I did and there wasn't any upside from a property standpoint. So it wasn't a case where there was an unfinished basement or like a second suite. It was just a single family property. The upside was just renovating. So the way I thought about it was I was going to do a hotel, but if the hotel was not successful and I didn't sell the property, then I would flip it. And flipping was the only way to add value to the property. I couldn't add a second unit. I couldn't, build a garden suite. So it was just renovate the property to its full extent and then sell it. So when I was raising capital, I raised capital for the hotel, but also had the capital for the flip as well lined up in an event where the deal didn't sell. So that was just my way of ensuring that I wasn't stuck doing the hotel for that property. So I wanted to get your own thoughts on how you view your own properties off market. Like, what are the things you put in place to ensure that, okay, if this doesn't sell, I'm not stuck. I can basically exit any other way on the MLS.
Yeah, sure. I think you nailed a lot of the things I would look at. I mean, definitely starting off, I need to see if there is any upside I can add to the property. So let's, for example, say it's a 2-bedroom house. The comps support it. Well, is there an option to add a 3rd bedroom down the road? Convert it to a 3-bedroom house? unfinished basement, definitely something we always look at. I mean, I find like those are the most appealing because in this day and age, everyone wants to kind of convert that basement into an in-law suite or a legal basement just to offset their mortgage payments. So I've noticed that in the last year, a lot of people, when they come in on the retail side, they're like, well, you know what? Can someone live in the basement? They don't necessarily care if it's a legal basement. They might just convert it to an in-law suite and have a family member live downstairs, you know? So that actually helps you in terms of having multiple exits when it comes to wholetailing. The fix and flip, if that's the only strategy that works, and I've had situations where that was the only strategy that works. I mean, I'm looking at it from a spread standpoint. So, for example, I mean, if the ARV is 700, I'm locking this up for less than 500K. So for me, that 200K spread gives me an immense buffer to mitigate any market cycles or any risks that I might encounter before I actually dispo it. There's also the fact that a lot of investors and sometimes even retail buyers, they don't understand how to assess rental costs. You know, we had a project where someone walked in, it was on market, and they said, yes, this is a complete flip. We're going to flip this. I said, okay. They said, well, you know what? At the price point that it's listed on the market for, it's going to cost $100,000 in renovations. So that then our numbers don't work anymore. We can't flip this. We're not making any money. And I assessed it at maybe 45, 50K rental budget. So they doubled it. Of course, if you're going to take it from 50K rental to 100K rental, there's a variance, a huge variance there. I mean, as an experienced investor, you understand that what the rental cost would be because you've done it multiple times. You understand materials, you understand labor costs. So if you're a beginner investor sometimes, or just a retail buyer, you don't have that understanding. So you don't know how to run the numbers properly. So that also, it depends on who your end buyer is. That allows you to have that exit. You know, a corporation coming in, chances are they are experienced investors, which is one of the cases I had, where they actually saw an opportunity to pick up something on market, renovate it, and I think they're still in the process of renovating it. So it kind of gives me an idea of like how long this renovation would have taken if I had taken it on, which once again, return on time. And I'm not looking for those fix and flip projects at this moment. But that's what I would say in terms of multiple exits and property types. Definitely multiple exits. But if your only exit is going to be a fix and flip, you need to have a significant spread on that. And my spread is usually over the 6-figure mark.
Okay, perfect. So, I think now would be the right time to maybe, dive into a case study, because there's quite a number of questions I wanted to ask, but I feel like going through the case study, a lot of those questions would come naturally. Things like how you found the deal, how you priced the deal, like what were the spreads, and then we'll just go through that, right? So, do you have an experience that you've gone through that you think, you'd love to share, so we can break down on the episode?
Yes, 100%. I would start off by saying we've done a few wholetails over the past 2 years. Of course, obviously, as COVID started, ended almost around that time. So the biggest one that comes to mind and the most successful one thus far has been the one we did just this July. We picked it up off market through our flyer campaign. We sent the flyers out, a distribution of maybe 15,000 flyers. Obviously, you do not get 15,000 calls. we ended up getting a few calls. We vetted out 1 or 2 leads and we locked them up. The one we actually locked up was in Ajax, and that one we had picked up off market. The seller wanted a purchase price of 500K off market. The reason we target, older markets, I would say, is because we know these buyers have equity on the buy. Once again, referring back to, COVID actually helped out in terms of different aspects when it comes to real estate investing, which was appreciation. Well, this seller had locked up or bought this property a few years back, maybe about 7-8 years ago, for 200,000. So for him, it was likely paid off, and he was sitting on it. His tenant had moved out of the place, and he wanted to just get rid of it. So he wanted $500,000. So we had negotiated down to 450. It was, the dance you have to do when it comes to negotiation. We locked it up for 450. So he was happy. He made 250K on top of what he had purchased it for. He might have made more because I doubt he had a mortgage on it.
Yep.
We ended up only painting one room from a forest green color to an off-white color. The reason we did that is because we realized when you're taking pictures for MLS, it was not appealing at all.
Okay.
So what we wanted to do was we wanted to make it more inviting. Paint, to be honest with you, goes a long way. It's just visually.
So maybe let's slow down, because
Yeah.
I'm sure as people are listening to this, they're getting super excited. So, I'm just going to guide them through all the stages, right? So from the acquisition stage, you said that you started off with about 15,000 flyers. And
Yes.
then, as everyone knows, flyers are one of the acquisition channels for wholesaling. Was there a reason why you chose flyers versus, another acquisition channel?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I realized that we were getting a lot of leads from flyers. From the other leads that we had spoken to, they said they appreciate having something to look at, a hard copy in front of them. A
Yep.
lot of these houses, you got to understand, have older people living in them, or the
Yep.
owners are older. They're probably in their 60s, 70s, 80s. So for them, they're not tech savvy. They don't have time to sit in front of Facebook, Instagram, Google Ads, Google. So for them, it's easier when they get something shipped to their house or mailed to their house for them to open their mailbox and just look at something quickly. If you're
Yeah.
in front of them at that moment when they're actually thinking of selling their property, selling their house, that's when they'll give you a call. And a lot of them want to talk to you on the phone. They don't want to email you. So a lot of the
Yep.
calls are also being generated through those flyers. So that's one of
Got
the
it.
reasons we realized that a lot of our leads are coming through flyer campaigns.
Okay, perfect. And roughly, do you remember like how many calls came through?
On at that time 15,000, I think we got about maybe about 10, I would say, give or take. Some
Okay.
of them obviously end up being tire kickers, and some of them were a little more
Always.
yeah. Some people just want to save the commission. Some people actually just want you to give them an offer without seeing the place. And I'm like, that's kind of not possible. I need to come see the place. So yeah, I mean, and then of course, based on 10 calls, you understand which ones are worth pursuing, which ones are not. So you had two, and out of two, you usually lock up one, maybe two.
Okay, perfect. So you guys spoke with the sellers, you got it under contract. When the seller asked for 450, like, were they motivated? Did they have an idea of what the ARV was, or they just felt like, well, because I bought it for 200, 300 a few years ago, I'm fine with this?
No, so the seller actually had the market comps, and he knew that his neighbor was actually renovating the property next door.
Oh,
The property next door wasn't listed at that time, but he looked at it and he said, you know what? I think the comps are closer to 600, 650. He's probably going to list it at that much. He was also one of those investors that didn't understand the rehab cost, because he had the understanding that the rehab budget was going to be over $100,000. So when we went in there, we realized that it's not going to be $100,000 rental budget. It was a 2-bedroom house. I
yeah,
think it was about maybe 800, 900 square foot. So it wasn't that big, no basement. So we looked at it from the standpoint that this is not a significant rental budget.
yeah,
So for him, he looked at it. Okay, you know what? 650 is going to cost 100,000. Okay, they're asking me for 450. They need to make some money. Okay, I'll let it go for 450. So that was his
yeah.
understanding.
Okay,
Of course, don't forget, he wanted $500,000 to start off, but we had locked
yeah.
it up for 450.
Okay, so the ARV you had calculated at 650.
No, that was his ARV. Our ARV ended up being 700,000 because after we had closed on it, the next door house actually sold for 700,000.
Okay, so that actually worked in your favor. So the
Yes.
seller thought the ARV was 650, but a new comp sold once you guys closed on it at 700.
Yeah, the one next door sold for 700.
Okay, so if you could walk us through like how you price hotels, right? Because I also have my calculator in front, so I'm going to walk you through, like, both of us are going to walk through it.
Yes.
So at 700,000 ARV, how would you remove costs, to get to your max allowable offer?
Right. So that 700,000 ARV is not something that I'm looking at. I'm leaving that for the retail buyer, right? Because these comps
Got
are
it.
MLS.
Yep.
So I'm working it backwards from, okay, what do I want to dispo this at? Because I need
Okay.
to leave enough meat on the bone for the retail buyer. So
Nice.
we picked it up for 450. We ended
Okay.
up listing it on market at 529, right?
529. Okay.
We listed it at 529. Of course, we were not looking to make six figures every single wholesale we do. We're just making sure that we are in a line with what our strategy is, which is leaving a lot of meat on the bone for the retail buyer. We understood this was going to be a flip project.
Okay.
Someone could technically live in it, but I mean, it was really dated. I don't think anyone would want to live in it. There was forest green paint, which we had to paint. There was wallpaper in one of the rooms. There was no basement. But I know for a fact that the next door house, which was the same layout, sold for 700K once it was renovated. That's when we realized that, you know what, this is a flip opportunity for a retail buyer. So we listed
Okay.
it for 529. We had picked it up for 450. We ended up getting 560 for it.
Mm.
So a numbered corporation gave us an offer a few days later after it was on market for 560. We had multiple offers, but that was the one we went with. 560, no contingencies. Sold it to them for 560. They are in the process of rehabbing it, and at that time, their ARV was 700. So for them to pick it up at 560 and be able to sell it at 700, I'm sure they were experienced investors. My quote was about maybe $50,000 in terms of a fix and flip project. So even with
Okay.
that, they would be all in for, I would say, 610 plus closing, plus commission, plus maybe holding cost. I mean, there's still spread left in that deal for them to make a generous profit.
Okay. So you sold to them at 560. You bought it
Yes.
at 450. So that's like gross 110K.
Yeah.
So what were your costs, right? So there's the closing costs that you spent. You said you only held it for 3 weeks, so your holding costs were negligible. Then there was also like your rental costs, like for the painting, and also the costs to sell with a realtor.
Yeah, so there was commission costs involved, definitely. I mean, they take about maybe 5%. So from 560, 5% of that. And then the holding costs, yeah, we have private lenders that we work with. So no upfront fee when it comes to mortgage brokers or anything like that. Not the 1 or 2%. And then of course the paint was only $500. So I don't really even consider that. I mean, a rehab budget or rental cost. I mean, that's what a wholetail is, a true wholetail. And
Yep,
that's one
yep.
of the reasons I'm giving you this example is because that's literally all I did. I mean, I have those pictures on my Instagram where it shows you the difference from what a four screen to an off-white room looks like. It just enlarges the space, it makes it more inviting, and it makes the space look bigger, right? So a 10 by 12 room might look like a 12 by 14 room. So $500 of paint, which I didn't even obviously paint myself. I got someone who painted. I found the guys off Kijiji that did it remotely. There was a lockbox on the property. It was a day job, and then we got the pictures in. So 500 for that, my commission, my holding cost, and obviously the land transfer tax from
Yep.
450 when you're purchasing the property. Those were my biggest costs, I would say. And then in between that is just your spread. And of course, obviously, when I wholesale these properties, I do it in my corporation.
Got
So
it.
it's considered active income, business income. So your tax burden is less.
Okay. So if you take out selling cost of about 5%, which is about 31,000, you take out the closing costs, the mortgage broker costs, the land transfer tax, which is maybe 10K, give or take. You probably netted about maybe 70, 75K
Yeah,
in just
that's
like
about
three
it.
weeks of work.
That's yeah. Yeah. Actually, 3 weeks of work was actually from the day I closed on it and took ownership to when it sold firm. And then of course we had to
Okay.
hold it another 45 days to close on it with a new buyer. So
Oh,
yes,
I
but
see.
you're
Okay.
definitely right. In 3 weeks it was sold firm from when I purchased it. In terms of days of work, there was 1 day of work, which is the painting. So
And it was like
that's
500
the
bucks of work.
yeah, $500 of work pretty much. Maybe me going from the West GTA to Oshawa, which was a 2-hour round trip drive for me. So
You know,
that's a
so
wholesale, yeah.
so your return on time is like $75,000 for like 1 hour of work.
That's
Sorry, two
absolutely
hours you drove
yes.
to the property and you painted. You know,
And sorry, I
Maybe
would also say that the negotiation with the buyer for maybe a week or so prior to closing on the deal, right? So yeah, you're seeing him in
yeah.
person a little bit. There's conversation and time that goes into seeing the property, but yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, like
So
30 minutes, let's add
yeah,
1 more hour to it. So like 75K in 3 hours.
right.
So yeah, thanks for breaking that down. So you like to your point, that's really the upside of wholetailing. So did you know when you were buying the property that the amount of work that was required to at least offload this successfully was just paint, or was that a pivot while on the market?
No, as soon as I walked into there, I realized that I do want to brighten up the space. I mean, because we're putting this on MLS pictures, I didn't really know if it was going to be a corporation, another investor, or a retail buyer
Yep,
that was going to come by it. So for me, I mean, I understand what paint can do to a space. Having dark paint, a forest green, outdated color, and having a bright neutral color. I mean, it goes
yep,
a long way. So all we really wanted to do was paint. We didn't change any fixtures. We didn't do any flooring, baseboards, nothing like that. We just painted it just for the purpose of showcasing a larger and brighter property for MLS pictures. Once you scroll through
got
those
it.
pictures, you can definitely tell there's work that needs to be done with this property.
Yep,
But once again, Deji, to be honest with you, our secondary strategy, because the next door house sold for 700K, was okay. You know what? If this does not sell on market at like 529, we will take it on and we will do the rehab and fix and flip it. So
got it.
as a wholetailer, you need to have multiple exit strategies. But if I had picked it up for 450, which I mean I did pick it up for 450, but it wasn't able to sell, and I put in 50K of reno in there, I'm all in for let's say 515. The comp next door was 700K. Yes, I
Yep,
could go ahead, spend all that time rehabbing it, taking it to the finish line as a fix and flip project, and yeah, I would have probably made over six figures on this deal. But for me, the return on time is what matters to me right now, right? As a
okay.
wholetailer and obviously as a wholesaler, you just want to get in and out of deals as soon as possible. You know,
Yes, quick question. What did you estimate the reno budget as if you had to flip it yourself?
$50,000.
Okay, because I wanted to run a scenario if this was a wholesale. So, for example,
Okay,
I'm running it through my calculator,
sure.
right? So, if, for example, I had gone in there, the ARV is 700,000, right?
Yeah.
So, that's usually the first thing I would identify. What's the ARV if it's fully renovated?
Yes.
So, I have some line items. I would first take out the closing costs, right? So, how much is it going to cost for the buyer that I'm
Yes.
assigning to close on it? So, give or take the closing cost plus the land transfer tax, I have that at 1.5%. So that's about 10,000, about
Okay.
10,005. Then for the holding cost, I estimated like 6 months of holding cost for the buyer, right? So
Okay.
that is, imagine, assuming the buyer does the flip for 6 months, pays private financing. And for those 6 months, I have it at 22,500
Okay.
for 6 months. And then I put the $50,000 you mentioned for the rental budgets. And then I put 5% if that buyer has to sell with a realtor, right? So that's about $40,000. So 5% plus HST, so about 40,000. And then I put like a 10% profit for the buyer. So if the buyer was only going to make 70K, right? So the ARV is 700, the buyer is only going to make 70K. If the buyer is okay making 70K, I might be able to wholesale this for $60,000. So a question to you, option one, if you can wholesale this deal for 60K versus wholetail it for 75 to 80K, which would you go with?
I feel like I would still go with a wholetail strategy. The reason I say that is once again, I don't necessarily consider myself a wholesaler. I don't have a buyer
Yep,
list. I don't have those resources in place. So for me, you can definitely leverage a JV relationship with a wholesaler and take it that route
yep,
as well. I mean that might be another exit strategy. To be honest with you, I mean you can probably take that as an alternative strategy if you wanted to exit a deal.
yep,
But in terms of wholesaling, yeah, I guess in this case, a wholesale could have worked. But with my mindset, it was like, you know what, we're going to put this on market. If it
yep.
doesn't sell, we're going to do the fix and flip. But this is, in my opinion, more of a unicorn deal. right? Because
Yeah, yeah,
I don't think wholesalers necessarily make a 60K to 100K assignment fee on every single deal. You know, there might be occasions,
yeah.
especially during COVID, especially during COVID, there were definitely occasions. But in this day and age, I mean, you really got to make sure that there's enough spread on any deal you buy, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So, so I see your point, and 60K wholesale deals might not necessarily be the norm anymore, like it was before. It still happens, but as you mentioned, like not as prevalent as it was during COVID. From my viewpoint, there's obviously a lot of assumptions I've put in place. So chances are that you might not eventually get that 60K as a wholesale, because you can send it out and the buyer will be like, hey, 70K is too small for me to make. Some buyers want to make 15% spread on any deal they do. So
right.
maybe they're like, I'm not okay with 70K. I want to make like 100K. Now your wholesale fee goes from 60K to like 40K. So it's like, those are some of the things that we take into account. From my standpoint, if I have two options to make 40K, 50K on a wholesale versus 75K on a wholesale, just depending on what the variance is, I probably would choose the wholesale if it's significantly more, right? Because as we discussed, right, it's like for every additional risk you take, there should be a commensurate reward. So if I'm making 50K wholesaling with zero risk, if I have to take additional risk, that 50K better jump from 50 to 70 or 80. Like I wouldn't take any risk just to make an additional 5K, for example. Like, if it's 50 versus 55, it makes no sense for me to take additional risk, like to potentially lose that 50K just to make an additional 5K, right? So those are some of the thought processes that I run through. But I know that a lot of people would always take the wholetail strategy because, once you go on the market, you have a significantly bigger buyer pool, right? And you could just sell for even 10, 20, 30, 40, 50K more, even 100K more. Like I've heard stories of people who have sold for like close to 100K more than what they even thought. Like I've worked with a partner, one of our partners, who bought a deal from us. He funded the campaign as one of our wholesaling partners, bought the deal from us and made six figures on the wholesale. So
Yeah,
there's
there you
been
go.
those
Yeah,
stories, right? So, but yeah, like, thanks for walking us through those numbers. So,
no problem.
so looking back, like, that's your primary strategy for now. Looking into 2024, do you feel like that's going to keep being your strategy in Ontario? Do you think it's going to change? Was that strategy for this type of market, or is this something that you think is going to continue to be a strategy as the market comes back?
I think there's definitely going to be an opportunity for these off-market deals and finding these off-market deals. In terms of if it's better to wholesale it, wholetail it, or fix and flip it, I mean, that's usually deal specific. In terms of my journey, I feel like I've narrowed it down to what's working for me. And what's working for me, once again, because I don't have a buyer list, I don't consider myself a true wholesaler, is the wholetailing strategy. And with the prices where they are right now and these high interest rates, I mean, every time these interest rates drop in Ontario, in the GTA, the prices end up going back up. I mean, there's a shortage of houses. There's a shortage of places people can live. So I think, going into 2024, I don't know where we are going to be this time at the end of the year in 2024. But if these interest rates go down, I mean, buyer power increases. So if your buying
Yeah.
power increases, I mean, these prices are going up. So if you can lock something up, and that's one of the reasons I said I'm still trying to buy at the end of 2023. Not that you're trying to time the market, but if you understand that, listen, like you're buying with significant equity or a discount on the buy, and you still put it on market based on current comps, regardless if those current comps have come down since, the summer of 2023, there's still an upside there. So even if the market shifts, let's say, the prices go higher, well, you know what? Just continue buying it at a discount. You buy it at a discount, you can't go wrong. Once again, I mean, my minimum spread on any deal has to be over six figures. So if the market is at 600K, I have to buy this for less than 500K.
Yeah.
That's, and you sometimes even need a bigger buffer than that. I mean,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
case study I shared was 450 to 700. There's a significant spread there. So at that time, it gives you more confidence to pursue this deal because you're like, what's the worst? I'm going to fix and flip it myself. Okay, well, there's so much more money if you actually do that, but you are spending a lot more time, and time is, the biggest asset you have. So that's one of the reasons. And back to your point, the wholesaling and wholetailing, once again, it's time and risk and reward.
Cool, man. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ardeep. This has been fantastic, man. So, like, this is bringing us to the end of the episode. Before we close this, I usually ask a question to every guest who comes. It's called our question of the show. And the question is around what your greatest L in real estate has been and what you learned from it.
You know what? I would probably have to say the biggest one has been you have to pivot as an investor. A lot of times they tell you to stay in your lane and just keep doing what you know and don't chase shiny objects. In this case, I had no intention of wholetailing. I never thought I would be wholetailing, trying to source my own off-market deals.
Yep.
So if I was still, as I mentioned, I started off doing U.S. investing and I was doing BRRRRs. And
Yep.
during COVID, I mean, I got outpriced in the state of Florida. So I could no longer do BRRRRs there. I mean, the price is appreciated. There's nothing to buy. Everyone gobbled up all the inventory. So if you sit on the sidelines and you don't take action and you don't do something as an investor, I mean, you're wasting time. So for me to actually pivot or transition into wholetailing, I realized, listen, I'm from Canada. I live in Mississauga. I should be doing something here as well instead of just focusing on the States. So that kind of brought me back. And that's why I consider myself a cross-border investor, because you need to diversify a little bit, not just in different markets, but at the same time, you need to diversify in different strategies that work in specific markets. It's not about chasing shiny objects, but it's by learning about what can work here, and then once it starts working, stick to it. So once again, like in Ontario, wholetailing has been working for me, and that's what I'm pursuing. And there was a learning curve to it, but that's what I've learned. We don't know what the next 5 years look like. Maybe wholetailing might not work. Who knows?
Yeah.
Something might happen, and it's like, okay, what do I do now? And you just got to be open-minded that you got to learn and continue learning as you go through this journey of real estate investing.
Oh man. Thank you. Thank you. So where can people connect with you if they want to find you?
Yes, I'm very active on Facebook and Instagram. On Facebook, my profile is Ardeep Puri, and on my Instagram handle is Ardeep_Puri. So they can send me a DM and we can connect.
Perfect, man. Thank you very, very much, Ardeep. Thank you very much for joining us on today's call. That's it, folks. Thank you very much for listening to the Deals Estate Wholesaling Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review us on Apple, Google, and Spotify. And be sure to hit that subscribe and notification button so that you know when this episode drops and when the next episode drops. So until then, remember, a deal a day keeps scarcity at bay.